Hello, everybody. This is Ryan,
This is Avery.
and we are from the Frame by Frame King Crimson podcast, and you are listening to Pods Like Us.
There we go. Headphones became unplugged. How you doing?
I'm not too bad, fella. How you doing?
Not bad, not bad. So how's things then, Dean? Are you busy?
I am, yeah. I'm partway through a big Arts Council funded photography project. So that's working with schools and community groups mainly, but teaching people an analog historical photographic process. So yeah, it's massive. It's a considerable amount of funding to pay for all the equipment and stuff and my time and things. So it's taken up a lot of time at the minute to make sure I'm getting things right and giving it full attention, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much taking up every spare moment of time I've got, which is good because it took, you know, the whole project's been well over a year.
Yeah.
Sort of getting things set up and applying for the funding and things like that. So yeah, I need to give it a good amount of attention and make sure I do it right because yeah, potentially it could be a bigger project in the future. So yeah, but yeah, I'm, you know, keeping on, which is all good considering the last year. It could be,
yeah,
you know, for someone who works in the arts, creative industries and stuff. Last year could have gone very, very wrong. I think had my circumstances been slightly different. So I'm incredibly lucky, I think, at the moment to be working and have stuff to work on. So yeah, I can't grumble at all, really.
No, not that anybody would listen anyway, normally.
No. Well, there's bigger things to moan about, I think, than my work situation.
Yes, I've read all of the things people moan about online. All over the place. Yeah, you were saying, so, yeah, it's lucky you've been able to do that with everything going on. I thought that the lockdown would have backed all of your work up.
Yeah, I shifted mainly into working remotely. So a couple of projects that I'm involved in, they are community projects, and I've been employed as a documenter and a blogger, and just sort of managing the social media feeds and things like that. So a lot of those projects ended up making sort of art packs and stuff in conjunction with other artists. So I helped on the design layouts and things for these packs and carried on kind of blogging and documenting where I could and things. So it's like a lot of that work it kind of shifted in nature. Yeah. You know, it was like obviously I couldn't get out and be photographing and videoing stuff that was happening, but I could help out in other ways just at distance, which worked out really well because it still meant that there was an income coming in. Yeah. And then a lot of my workshop delivery moved online as well with other organisations. So it's kind of moved to teaching smartphone photography via Zoom, which was a bit of an eye-opener. I don't know whether I'd go back to it, but yeah, it was just it was just, a lot of places were trying different things out. So it was like, well, I'll give it a whirl because that's kind of the way that the world has gone at the moment. So yeah, with like the ease into lockdown and things have started to look similar to the way they were before. So yeah, it's not been too bad a transition really,
but really, I mean, the smartphone thing, that's along similar lines. I mean, they were doing things like that with some professional films, weren't they, at points? Because I know we saw, I can't remember what film it was, but the idea behind that was that the footage was recorded by devices that were so it made it look like they were recorded by camera phones or by cheap video cameras and things like that. So it's almost like a same sort of thing as that then.
Yeah, it's just using what tools people have accessible to them, I suppose. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's been an interesting ride this last year, just seeing what ways I could kind of change my approach to work and what things kind of worked, what felt comfortable, what didn't. I've got to say that I've not enjoyed the amount of screen time that I've had to have. That's, this project I'm working on at the moment for the Arts Council is all outdoors, and like I say, it's all analog photography. So there's no screens, no digital, no Photoshop. It's just, kids and people outdoors interacting with nature and creating some artwork. And so it's just like, thankfully I'm not in a digital realm on that project, because I kind of had my fill towards the end of the lockdowns. It's just like I'm tired of constantly looking at a screen and conducting meetings on screens. It's like you finish a bit of work and it's like, right, I've got a meeting now, but you just don't move away from the computer,
Absolutely.
So,
But I mean, I used to, when I was at college and we did media, I loved the whole thing with just film in a camera, and then having the dark room that they had there, and then processing your own developing your own photographs. I mean, that was fun, long-winded and that, but still fun when suddenly you'd be there and from nothing this picture would appear and you'd be like, wow, and
yeah, very much so. That's what I learned on. That was my, back when we met, I was doing the photo courses and stuff then, and that was all film. There's no digital available really. It was more a case of you develop your negatives, and if you wanted to do any digital manipulation, you'd scan your negatives. Because the digital technology and stuff just costs so much money. It was phenomenally expensive then.
And now it's gone the other way. Digital cameras are cheaper, and if you want a camera with film, it's more expensive.
Well, yeah, and it's like massively more accessible to people as well now. So I mean, every one of us has got a smartphone. Well, most of us. And I mean, it's like a media center in your pocket, isn't it? It's like you've got your camera, video camera, audio, and like podcasts and stuff. It's like literally the world of entertainment and the way that you can document and interact with people is all in this like tiny slab in your pocket, which is bonkers, really, isn't it?
It is. It really is. Shocking.
So, where are we at then? What should we? Are we? I can't bring up the list of things, the bullet point list you gave me, because speaking of phones, my phone won't show it me for some reason. So I'll sing from.
I've got it on two different windows. I've got our chat in one window, and then at the side of that, I've got the Facebook open with with those bullet points.
So I'm using my tablet, and I can't double screen on it, just because it's the most reliable Zoom machine I've got. So, but yeah, if you hit me with the bullet points, and I'll I'll riff with you on them, mate.
Yeah. I mean, when I was talking to my brother James, we were just generally chatting, and then left us at that. Really, there wasn't really a even official opening to it as such. You know, where I did the hello and blah blah blah. We just what's it, and so and then I think during the conversation, I'm going to have to find out and listen back actually, because I might have to do an introduction to that one, and let people know that I was talking to my brother, which would be funny. But yeah, if we just generally discuss and hopefully get those points out, I think, you know, it. Sometimes I think people like these shows where people just chat. By the sound of it, it's almost like a Radio 5 chat talk radio type thing, isn't it? I think people are doing for the most part.
I get you.
And it makes a change from the formality of the shows that I do with podcasters as well.
Yeah, I get you.
But, so for anybody listening, I'm talking with my friend Dean Leivers from, shall we say, how many years ago? Ooh, dear.
It would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been on the band scene, wouldn't it, in Mansfield? So it will be 2001.
Yep, probably late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. So a good 20 odd years.
Because both of us used to be musicians in bands, and yeah, we used to do the circuit around that age.
Yeah, and definitely avid gig goers.
Definitely went to more gigs than I played.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Same here, actually. But yeah, they were good times. They were,
yeah. But the rigors of life mean that we have to, you know, work for a living.
Yeah. But then I suppose, you know, you're, like I say, you've moved into podcasting, which is just, it's media in a different way, isn't it, I suppose?
It is, yeah. And then I still get the thing of doing the sound editing, which is a bit like making music, I suppose, with that and the mixing. So, yeah, because I've got mastering software as well, and I utilise that.
G'day. This is Matty C from the Astros Fantasy Football Podcast, way down in Australia. And we love getting to listen to Marv meet new podcasters from all over the world here on the Pods Like Us podcast.
What made you want to start podcasting? Was it just that you listened to loads? I know you listen to loads when you're on shift and stuff, don't you?
I do, and I listen to a lot more now than I did then as well. Nature of the beast, having to do this show, so I listen to more podcasts to get an idea of what they're on about and then talk with them. It's a sign of respect, really. You know, if I listen to their shows first, then at least I know I can approach them with some knowledge of what they're on about. Yeah. So when people are bound to have heard that from what we've already discussed, that Dean works in photography and filmmaking as well. Yeah,
a little bit. Yeah. I don't do as much film, and actually, I suppose a lot of it's kind of more promotional output and stuff for clients. So it's very specific briefs, but it's normally to kind of, you know, not advertise something, but it may well, just for example's sake, I've just recently been filming some bits for a charity that need to show off care home settings because people aren't allowed to go in and view. So it's just, yeah, I mean, it just depends on what people need that output for, but it tends to be promotional stuff for video. But I do a lot more photography than I do video. Yeah, because it's what I trained in. Video kind of came later just because my cameras had the capability to shoot video.
Yeah. And you've obviously been at college and done college courses for that back in the day as well. Like I did college courses as well for things.
Yeah, I mean, the photography thing was kind of an accident. It started just as a night course while I was working after I'd finished school.
Yep.
And then, yeah, that kind of spiraled into, just from an evening a week for a couple of years into doing a full national diploma and then a degree and then a teaching degree after that. And then just trying to figure out a career path, really. The plan was to work in colleges, but jobs are quite limited, I suppose. There's not a lot of availability, for roles in FE colleges. People tend to get a job in FE and they stick with it as long as they possibly can. There's not a lot comes up. So yeah, I spent a few years doing learning support in colleges and things, still working in education, but about 7 years ago I went freelance, moved to Leicester and started working for an arts charity.
Yep.
Who work with at-risk young people and yeah, just kind of forged this freelance workshop leader, photographer for hire career that seems to be working so far. But I don't know whether it's because I mix the kind of the two strands. So it's, I can be a commissioned photographer that will work for hire, but with my teaching background and interest in education and educating people about photography, I can do that as well. I can work and lead workshops and work with classes or, so yeah, it's kind of given me a lot more scope. It's not just like, oh, I'm a wedding photographer and all I do is weddings. There's a lot of kind of strings and different avenues and things that I can work down. So it's good because it means work's varied. I'm not sort of doing the same kinds of briefs all the time, which I think would ultimately make me bored of my job. If I was just doing the same thing all the time. I like the kind of variety that my career at the minute gives me,
Yep. Still there, mate?
I am, yeah. I'm here.
Okay. I thought you'd gone for a second there.
It may well have dipped. Oh yeah, yours just did that weird robot thing, so maybe it did dip out.
Yep. But it's interesting because back in the day, I used to work voluntarily, sort of with Nottinghamshire Youth Arts, obviously, because I used to work at Bandwagon Studios, and then which eventually became the old Library Studios with Andy Dawson and Mark Alsop and all them. So yeah, there's something about. In some ways, I miss those days, and there's almost a sense of that you're helping people out and doing something good while you're doing those sort of things.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's important that people recognise that jobs in the creative sector are valid.
Yep.
It's a valid career, working as a photographer or working in media or whatever, and whether that brings you a massive wage or not, it's. Like if you're thinking about podcasting, a lot of it's paid for through advertising, isn't it? And having advertisers stump up cash. So, because ultimately these things cost money to do, don't they? You need the kit, you need the time as well. I think people often forget that. It's incredible actually the amount of times that I might work in a school and I get asked, is this your hobby? It's like, well, yeah, it is, but it's my job, it's like, it's kind of a hobby / job. I've turned my hobby into a career. It's like, but people seem almost surprised that you make a living out of it, And it's like, well, this stuff doesn't happen without finance, I can't buy a camera on fresh air and goodwill, No. So yeah, it's like kind of, it's good, I think, to make people realize that, this costs money and there's value to it. It's like, you could sort of say, well, where's the value in you teaching 30 kids how to do an alternative photographic process and stuff? But it's like, I'm trying to help people, I think, see the value in creativity.
Yep.
And whether they become, a scientist, a politician, a whatever, it's like something completely unrelated to the arts. Creativity is an important part of people's lives, thinking creatively or having that ability to use your imagination or react creatively to a situation. It's a massively important skills, I'd say. So yeah, it's kind of, I feel like on the surface, people say, oh, it's a really nice picture that you've made. But it's like, there's a lot of things happening, I think, there with the creative industries that kind of go unnoticed, sort of hidden benefits to it all.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I think in all media, it's different to a lot of other jobs where there are certain things like with music and books and films, this certain link that you get to them where, for instance, a song if you listen to a song suddenly on the radio, you might think back to the first time that you heard that. There might be a special memory to that, whereas to most other jobs there isn't. And I think that's where media is, like music and film and even photographs. I can look at photographs from when I was younger, and I can sort of have memories about that moment or times around then that picture will bring back to me. So I think that's something that's very special about all forms of media.
And I think sometimes as well, it comes down to like the purpose of it. Some media, its purpose is just to, entertain.
Yep.
Others is to inform, like with your podcast, it's kind of almost like breaking down that wall, isn't it? And sort of saying this, it's almost like a behind the scenes, lifting the lid, like asking people how they go about making their shows, doing, what are the nuts and bolts of doing that. And that serves a purpose, doesn't it? It serves a purpose to people who are interested in podcasting. It serves a purpose to you as well, because it's your interests.
Yeah.
And the shows you're interested in as well. So like getting, everyone gets different things out of different types of media, don't they? And whether you choose to engage with that or not, it serves a purpose for some people. It's like, I don't particularly buy into like all the sort of Love Island and reality TV, but for a lot of people it's escapism and it serves a purpose, and that's cool. It's fine. It's horses for courses, isn't it? You can't like everything and you shouldn't feel like you need to like everything, I don't think. Because I mean, it's similar for me actually when listening to podcasts, thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think about years and years ago, I was very much a completist. It's like I get into, I'll download a new podcast and someone's recommended or whatever. And it's like, right, start from episode 1, download them all, start going through and through and through. And now I don't do that. No. I'm more selective, I suppose. And I go in and out of phases as well. It's like, I'll listen to certain podcasts a lot.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, actually my interests have kind of changed slightly now. So I'll just unsubscribe or unfollow that particular podcast. Or there are a lot of stuff I listen to, like, trying to think, like This American Life, for example. It's a very long podcast. Each episode is an hour long at least. And having 2 kids in the house and work and stuff like that, and not always having time to listen, I'll literally just look at the show notes and think, that's not really a subject I'm that fussed about listening to. So I just mark it as played, and skip past it.
Yeah.
Whereas years ago, I would have been like, can never miss it, must leave it on my phone until I've finished all of those episodes. And this, it's like, I'm not like that anymore. It's life's too short, I think, to be all, I must listen to all 480 episodes and catch up. It's like, no, just jump in at that point and see where it is. And I've come back to stuff as well.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you do this, but I'll dip out of something for like 3 months and then just come back to it and start listening again, you know. And so yeah, maybe I'm a fickle media adopter, but I don't know. Maybe it's more about choice. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Making sure that
it's one of those things, isn't it? Where it's like music, where there'll be an artist or a band that you love, and then for a while you might not listen to them, and then months or maybe a year goes by, and you'll suddenly think, do you know what? I'll listen to them. I'm in the mood for listening to them now. So I think that's the same with everything. It's like films with a certain actor or by a certain director. Sometimes you'll watch them in a big clump. You might think, oh, I'm going to watch 5 films made by Hitchcock or 6 films. You might watch all this clump of films by him, and then suddenly not watch any of his films for a while, and then after a while you might think, do you know, I just fancy watching Psycho or even Frenzy or Family Plot, or I don't remember much about the Family Plot. What was that like? And you'll just pull it out and put it on, or it's the same with all media. I don't think it's something that's just specifically yourself. I think a lot of people are the same, I would have thought.
Yeah, I've done it with bands before where I've been a diehard fan of a band and bought built sort of up to album 4 or something, and then album 5 comes out and it just doesn't particularly appeal or whatever. And again, like years ago, I probably would have been the sort of person being like, oh, but I love this band, I'll buy it anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas now I'm like, nah, that album's a bit of a duffer. I'm not enjoying it, not feeling it. I'm not going to buy it. And then it might be like take 2 albums down the line where it's like, oh, actually, I'm into what they're doing now again. And then, might dip back in. But I don't know, maybe that's like, like going back to what we were saying about phones and stuff earlier, there's been a massive kind of media thing in your pocket and whatever. And I think it's a lot easier these days, isn't it, to be able to dip in and out of stuff. Yeah. I think the danger is when you're dipping in and out of stuff and you're kind of not engaging with it properly. You just sort of just kind of consuming media on like this rolling sort of treadmill of, it's like when you put Netflix on or something, it's just so much to choose from. It's just really easy just to go, I'll just stick anything on, whatever. It's like, rather than really seeking something out that is kind of meaningful to you. I don't know. I struggle with that kind of subscription model. I feel like sometimes I have too much choice.
Yeah.
And I suppose I've noticed that quite keenly, after like listening to podcasts for well over a decade now.
Yeah.
And there being sort of those 2 booms where, when they first kind of became popular, when you sort of, like the rise in popularity, say something like that, the Ricky Gervais podcast or whatever, ages and ages ago, through to like that kind of, when Serial came out. I don't know whether you ever listened to Serial. The big American sort of true crime podcast that just went massive.
Yeah.
And then sort of, after that, it's like, right, we've got to get on podcasting. We've got to make podcasts. We've got to do everything out of podcast. It's like everyone's got a podcast. And the lockdowns as well. It's like, I can't remember what I was listening. It might have been some comedy show or something on Radio 4. And it was, this comedian was sort of saying, oh yeah, I've just done the typical, mid-30s white male in lockdown thing. I've bought a microphone and started a podcast. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, which I've had those thoughts as well. I thought, maybe I'll do one. Maybe I'll start. It's like, but there's a lot to choose from. You can't listen to everything, can you? It's like, there's so much out there. Yeah. But I suppose that maybe I've shifted my listening habits a lot as well, in that I used to listen to a lot of BBC output as podcasts.
Yeah.
Until over the last year, I kind of realised, from working at home even more than I normally would have done pre COVID, a lot of the podcasts that were BBC that I listened to, I can just listen to live actually on the radio. So I was sort of like, why am I listening to this as a podcast when I could just be sat there at 3:00 on a Thursday afternoon at my desk working, listening to the program live as it goes out? So I've kind of, my subscription feed has diminished rapidly, but now I think I'm probably listening on a podcasting platform. I'm listening solely to podcasts, things that are made as podcasts.
Yeah.
And then I'm listening to radio shows as radio shows, like separating my media out, I suppose, into their little neat pockets. But yeah.
Yeah, it's strange because at the moment there's a crossover where you'll find things like the BBC. Because I mean, I'm subscribed to. I've got the BBC Sounds app on my phone, so I can listen to BBC shows on that if I want to. I mean, I was looking at yours. I think it was the other day, and I've actually added a one of their shows onto my BBC Sounds app to listen to at some point, because I saw it on your feed on Facebook, and I thought, oh crikey, I've got to watch that. And it was the Shock Waves with Anushka Shankar?
Yes, yeah. Which again, I probably would have picked up as a podcast back in the day, but now sort of paying a bit more attention to radio schedules and things. It's a program that I listen to live. I listen to the whole series live, which is good. It's weird. When BBC Sounds first came out, I don't think I really understood it. I was like, well, are they kind of just trying to jump on this podcasting bandwagon? I didn't realise it's more like iPlayer, isn't it, for radio?
Yeah.
So it's a catch-up service with content that is made specifically for BBC Sounds.
Yeah.
And after delving into it a little bit more, I'm like, actually, it kind of works independently to, say, the podcast app that I use. That's one thing I've kind of had to get my head around, I suppose, with listening to a lot of audio content, especially spoken audio and things, is that now I kind of predominantly use certain apps as they're kind of like channels, I suppose. So, BBC Sounds, I'll listen to live radio on, and cast it to a smart speaker or something like that, and then catch up on shows that I wanted to listen to, but, was working out of the house or something at the time. And then I use Pocket Casts for my podcast subscriptions. Yeah. But then some of my favorite podcasts have moved over to Spotify because they've been bought. The company that produced the shows have been bought out by Spotify.
Okay.
So now I use Spotify as another podcasting app, for specific shows. And a similar thing with Luminary as well, the Luminary podcast app. There's a particular show that you can only listen to as a Luminary original. You can only listen to all of the shows on Luminary, but that's a paid for monthly subscription service. So I basically wait around until a new series comes out, pay, for a couple of months, listen to it. And then as soon as the series is finished, I unsubscribe again, so I think it's kind of like my listening habits have enabled me to sort of pick and choose, what kind of platforms I'm taking media in on. And if a podcast is good, I'll follow it. I'll follow it if it moves to a paid platform, or if it's moves to a different kind of platform and things. My worry with stuff like Spotify is that Spotify is a company predominantly that is trying to make money and stay afloat, for its shareholders. So there probably will come a time where it's like, yeah, you've got to pay for the podcast now. I'm sure there's people scratching their heads in Spotify towers, figuring out how they can monetize all this stuff. And then I'll have to think very hard about whether I'm going to give them £9.99 a month or whatever to just listen to podcasts. You know, it'll have to be a decision I have to make. But yeah, if a show's good, I don't mind following it, you know, and moving around the virtual dial, if you will, you know, if you're thinking in old radio terms. But
hey there, this is Bobby with the Rock Guys podcast, and you are listening to Marv Smooth on the Pods Like Us podcast. Check him out.
But yeah, BBC Sounds. It's the history of it is that it used to actually it was complicated because it used to actually be BBC iPlayer, but then on your phone you used to have two different BBC iPlayers because there was one that did the video. Or you know, television and films and that, and then the other one was the one for listening to radio shows on, you know, listen again or whatever, you know, listen later sort of thing. And then it was complicated, like I said, because then you got two apps called BBC iPlayer, and the only thing that differentiated them was that you had a picture of a television screen on one, and then you had like this music symbol on another, so that you knew which was which. And then I think 2 or 3 years ago, they employed somebody to look into it, and who took charge basically of what is now called BBC Sounds, and she just basically reinvigorated it and made it into something that it is now. That's because it wasn't getting that much interest a few years ago, because like yourself, a lot of people were thinking, well, what is this all about? You know, and they couldn't understand what was going on. So she basically just made it what it is, and I think it makes it better.
Yeah, especially because like a lot of their content is already available on other podcast platforms. So it's kind of like, I don't get it, you know? But after looking at it a bit more, it is really good, you know. There's bespoke stuff made for it, you know. There's music mixers with full tracks on that are made for the platform, you know. So it's a bigger thing than I originally thought it was, I suppose. And yeah, it's. I mean, I suppose, you know, you sort of think of it almost as we're talking about subscription services and things just then.
Yeah,
the BBC technically is a subscription service, isn't it? You know, we're paying the license fee. But I mean, the amount of use I get out of, you know, BBC Radio, iPlayer, BBC Sounds, even just like checking BBC Sport and stuff every now and then. I mean, it's definitely worth what I pay for it. You know, if I kind of think about it, you know, I sat and watched the FA Cup final at the weekend, and it's like, yeah. You sort of think, maybe I only watch one sporting event or whatever every few months on the BBC and stuff. But to pay for a ticket to go and watch the FA Cup final would cost you a fair amount of money, wouldn't it? And I know it's not the same as being there, but to have the kind of luxury of that event beamed into your house, it's, you know, you've got to feel that you have to contribute to that. Surely, you know, I've never ever had any problems justifying, I suppose, the license fee to myself, because I think it's completely worth it. You know, all those years revising for GCSEs and whatever, and using BBC Bite Size, and like I say, checking BBC Sport, and you know, the radio will be on in our house pretty much like 6 to 8 hours a day. Yeah. So it's, you know, definitely like getting my money's worth out of it. I think what kind of grates me about things like Spotify and stuff is that, you know, you're almost expected to pay a very, very similar cost to what you would pay for the license fee per month. But the people generating that content are the ones that are losing out. You know, they're not, you know, the artists aren't getting paid well from Spotify's subscription model, whereas an organisation like the BBC is paying substantial wages to people who do, you know, top work. I mean, you've only got to look at like the documentaries or whatever that come out on the BBC and things. It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
people are paid properly through that organisation. Whereas, yeah, I feel like if I had a Spotify subscription, I'd always wonder where my money was going. You know, it's like, because all that content is just kind of, I mean, there's probably a lot of people making a lot of money, and I imagine it's Spotify, largely major labels, and then it trickles all the way down that tree until, you know, a small band or relatively big band gets their measly check at the end of the year saying, you had X, you know, hundreds of millions of streams, and here's your 25 quid or whatever that earned you. Because, well, we must have read the stories where it sort of says, you know, the amount of stream plays you need to get in order to make any money is just astronomical, isn't it? So it's,
Yeah, I haven't made any money from the tens of thousands of streams of my songs on Spotify that people have done.
Yeah. This is it. You should just leave it playing overnight, every night.
Yeah, I should do that actually. One of these nights, I should just leave my own music playing on Spotify through headphones, and then see how much money I make at the end of the year. If I keep doing that. Yeah.
Repeat all. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur.
And we're from the Spy Hards podcast.
That's right, and you are listening to Pods Like Us, the podcast that also has the Midas touch.
So it's almost blurred where the radio world is going into the podcast world, and the podcast world is going into the radio world. Where for my last season 2, I chatted with Jerry Edwards, who owns a company called Podcast Radio, and they are basically a radio station that plays podcast. And then on the other hand, like we were saying with BBC Sounds, you've got the BBC who do radio shows, and they're going into the podcast world. So the worlds are almost meshing, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think, you know, like a massive corporation like the BBC, you know, savvy enough to realise that podcasting is a huge deal. I mean, you've probably got to, like, you look at what are maybe like the most successful podcasts, they're probably getting a substantial amount of sponsorship in. And I suppose it would be daft for a corporation like the BBC not to have stuff available on podcasting stream, you know, podcasting players and whatever, because it'd be a great way to drag people in to maybe becoming a radio audience as well, you know?
Yeah.
And interestingly, actually, the Fortunately podcast with Fee Glover and Jane Garvey is, you know, they're stalwarts of BBC radio, you know, they're, you know, broadcasting legends. But that podcast started as a podcast. But the popularity of that podcast has meant that the Radio 4 controllers have gone, well, actually, we'll just put this out as a live program on a late night. You know, I think it's on like a Thursday evening at sort of 11:30 at night. But that, again, it's another example of that. It's like, well, this podcast is really successful, so we should just turn it into a radio show. Yep. Whereas they've done the vice versa, haven't they? Where they've gone, well, you know, a lot of people like to listen to the Friday night news quiz or the other kind of comedy content on Radio 4. Yeah. Let's make that available as a podcast, and also let's make it available on BBC Sounds. I suppose, you know, it's like pushing the content out in order, I would assume, to bring in a solid audience for radio shows and things. So yeah, it kind of works both ways. I think it'd be massively unusual, I think, for a media company like the BBC to kind of totally ignore podcasting or something, wouldn't it? But yeah, I think they've kind of got it good though, because the content is already brilliant because it's been made for radio. So to just drop it into a podcast, like a podcatcher or, you know, whatever, is a relatively straightforward process for them. whereas people who are podcasting and making things specifically for a podcast platform, you know, it has to be a sort of well-rounded show that works right from the off, you know, that is trying to just build an audience over time. And the BBC have kind of already got an audience there, haven't they? I suppose they just want people to listen live and to come in a bit more regularly, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Hey, it's Gil from the Mind Podcast. Today's mind culture and social podcast. And you're listening to Pods Like Us.
So when were you first introduced to podcasts then, Dean? What was your first show, if you can remember? And, you know, when was it?
It would have been when I was at uni. So I remember really, really starting to get into it sort of back end second year towards third year. So I was thinking probably like 2007, 2008, something like that. And it was largely only because I'd got an iPod. And so, you know, logging into iTunes to sort of sync and update music and stuff, and noticing the podcast bit of iTunes and sort of like, oh, what's this, you know? And so, yeah, just trying out different podcasts that come up on the charts and things. So, yeah, I remember listening to Ricky Gervais stuff. I got really into a podcast called Beats in Space, which is basically like a massive music mix. A DJ in New York, Tim Sweeney, I think his name is. I've not listened to it for years, but yeah, just every week you just get this amazing mix of like electronica, dance stuff, you know, just beats all mixed live. And it was basically a live radio show in New York, but he'd just record it and put it out as a 2-part podcast. So he'd sort of have 1 hour and then he might have a guest mix in the second hour. So I listened to that an awful lot. And then, yeah, so, you know, like BBC content, as they started putting stuff out, became a big staple. And I was thinking the other day, actually, about what one of the podcasts that I've kind of listened to probably the longest. It's probably the Frank Skinner podcast, the Absolute Radio show, which they kind of cut all the music out of and they just have the links as one continuous kind of chit chat, you know, the stuff that would be between songs. But even that, actually, I've started listening to live now. You know, I've just put Absolute Radio on a Saturday morning and listened to it live. So kind of negates the need for me to listen to the podcast now. But yeah, that's been in my feed for a long, long time. I was kind of thinking the other day, I was like, God, you know, when he retires or leaves this radio show, I'm going to be devastated. It's like you sort of get used to hearing people, you know, and yeah. But yeah, they would be sort of like the big hitters when I first got into podcasts. And then, yeah, I think it's just kind of changed over the years, dependent on my interests. So I've there's a couple of photography podcasts I listen to, but by and large, a lot of the photography podcasts that are available are just I'm not really fussed about. They're more like tips and tricks and talking about gear and stuff like that, which is like, you know, that's not really my bag. You know, I'm not interested in that sort of stuff. But there's a couple of podcasts I listen to where, you know, they're more about the kind of sort of considerations of photography, you know, as an art form, and how you would approach work and stuff. So the United Nations of Photography is one that I listen to. It's a very short podcast, you know, 20 minutes a week. Yeah. But the host will sort of talk about key topics or things that are kind of happening in the world of photography that would affect a working photographer. And then there's a really nice segment where he speaks to people about what photography means to them. So a lot of sort of, famous high-end photographers will talk about what photography means to them. And then another one I've started listening to just recently is called A Small Voice.
Yeah.
And that's a lot longer. But another commercial photographer, Ben Smith, he speaks to working photographers about their current projects and what kind of influences their work and things. And for somebody that is, currently working on his own practice and his own research interests and stuff, that's quite interesting for me, because it's good to hear about, the way that other photographers approach their subjects and approach their projects and things. So yeah, although there's not a lot, I think the two photography podcasts that I do listen to are quite high end, I'd say, and definitely suit my interests. But the rest of the stuff is it's factual. I'm really interested I like learning things. I like to know about, I just like finding out about stuff, developing knowledge about things. So yeah, a lot of the podcasts I listen to are, kind of fact-based. No such thing as a fish is a favorite, just with the random facts from the QI officers. Yep. And then real life stuff, like real life subjects, people, documentaries, that kind of content. So, I mentioned This American Life earlier. I really enjoy that. Yeah. Heavyweight as well is one of my favorite podcasts. It's made by Jonathan Goldstein. It's produced by Gimlet, the podcasting company Gimlet, the ones that have just been bought by Spotify. And Heavyweight was the reason I started listening to podcasts through Spotify, because it's such a good podcast. It's just, it's about ordinary people and about ordinary lives and events and things, but it's kind of a lot of warmth and humor in it as well. So it's not always super serious. It's it's just nice snapshots, nice little vignettes of ordinary people's lives, which is really, really interesting. Because I kind of find people's stories interesting. StoryCorps is another one that I listen to a lot as well, which again it's an American podcast, but it's just people sit down and talk to each other. They speak to each other, and all these conversations about their daily lives and what makes them tick or things they're experiencing. It's that it's all recorded for posterity and put in the I think it's put in the Smithsonian Museum. Yeah. It's very similar to the Listening Project, the Radio 4 program. People speak, and then that's put in, those conversations are in the British Library. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in that, normal people's lives and stuff, which hopefully I'm going to feed that into a future photography project. I think I still would like to make some kind of audio material to kind of sit alongside a photography project, and still trying to figure that out, what that will look like, but I definitely involve people, and probably local people. I don't know, I'm kind of interested in my own environment, the place where I live, or the people that kind of inhabit similar spaces to me. So yeah, there may be some kind of audio element to come. So it's good for me to kind of use some of the stuff I listen to with research as well, I think. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
This is Dave of Live Life Loud, the Decibelic podcast, and you're listening to Pods Like Us with Marv.
What would you say is the importance to you of podcasts then?
I think just learning stuff, and a lot of the time hearing about people or places or things that, just never would have come across before, or, it's kind of like it's a good way for me, I think, to hear about other people's situations, what they're going through. it fascinates me that, somebody could, I don't know, be in India and making a podcast, and I listen to it. And it reveals a lot about cultural aspects in their life or their experiences. And I think that can only be a good thing. I think there's a lot of things these days are quite insular, really. I mean, we've got all this, like we're talking about technology and the way that technology opens up so much, it allows us to communicate with people across the world and, all over the place. But I still feel like a lot of the time we're still quite insular, and we're still quite, we're concerned about our own bubbles a lot of the time. Whereas I think, along with lots of other different types of media, podcasting can open doors to give us a kind of a flavour of the other people's experiences and lives. And yeah, I find that interesting. I find it interesting that I can find out about something that I, just would never ever experience. It would be it. Conversations I could. Again, I think it was on the StoryCorps podcast. Just listening to people from LGBTQ communities and hearing about their experiences or struggles, or just that fight for kind of acceptance in a society that by now should be massively embracing of all people, but still isn't.
Definitely,
and that is something that I will never truly experience. That kind of those knockbacks and those barriers to existing, being a white middle class man. Like, it's just, none of those struggles will largely ever be on my radar. And recognizing that I am incredibly privileged is important to me, and to be reminded of that, so a lot, sometimes listening to podcasts about people struggling and going through things is it's a good reminder. I think it's a good reminder that your life is actually pretty rosy if you think about it, and there are people out there struggling. I think that's why I tend to as well. I don't listen an awful lot to fiction-based podcasts. I think with the exception of Welcome to Night Vale, just mainly because it's bonkers and massively surreal. And on our radio, I listen to The Archers as well, firmly cementing that middle class reputation. But yeah, I don't listen to a lot of fiction because it's like I feel like real life is more interesting,
Yeah, I mean, what was it? Welcome to Night Vale, is it called, that one?
Yeah, Welcome to Night Vale.
Night Vale. Yeah, it's almost like would I be right in saying it's almost like League of Gentlemen, but on the radio?
Yeah, it's that kind of vibe. It's a sort of, it's an imagined town, American town with all lots of weird stuff happening, and the host is a radio host, and he's kind of talking to the residents of Night Vale about all these crazy goings on and things. And yeah, it's just nuts. So it's a good bit of escapism. But yeah, like I say, I don't know. I think real life is more interesting. So yeah, I'm the same with books. I struggle to read fiction. I really struggle to read fiction. Because I'd rather read about, an inspiring life story or something, film is probably like the main kind of fiction source I go to. But even then I can't stray too far outside of the realms of possibility. It's sort of, I don't get on with fantasy films, for example, but sci-fi is all right because it's, there's a realm of possibility within that, it's but orcs and and dragons and stuff, I'm kind of like, yeah, it's not my bag.
Yeah, sometimes listening to people, it's like when you listen to a show that's from another country. Even you get a touch and flavour of their culture when they're talking. I mean, I've had people on my show, and when I've said certain phrases, that we will know ourselves, and I'll mention a word or something, and they'll say, "What does that mean?" And there's certain idiosyncrasies about different cultures that you might catch on listening to shows, and it's also interesting to hear what's going on in another country as well. So I mean, I've got shows that I've listened to from America, China, Australia. There's a Serbian presenter that I listen to his show quite a bit, or to both of his shows. So there's that, and then another show I listen to, I don't know whether you know this one, is Life of a Lifer, and that one is actually where they're talking to different people who are in American institutions for life, imprisonment, and they'll talk about what led them to what they ended up doing, and you'll hear the remorse in them, and they'll discuss how the family life was and what's happened since, and you just think, wow, that's so completely not me, but it's interesting at the same time, like you were saying.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. Yeah, it's good to get outside your own bubble. I think it's good to, even if you can't, you're not experiencing something directly, but at least you're getting that experience from someone else. You sort of, taking on board what they're saying. Yeah.
That's just what we need in the background, isn't it? Somebody reversing a lorry.
Yeah, little reverse. I'm going to say the kids are just about to go up to bed, so I'm going to have to wrap up in the next 5 minutes, if that's all right.
Right, well, we've got to
because they need to sleep.
Okay, right. Have I got that? Got that. Where and when you listen? Got that. Got your taste. Got what they mean to you. Your introduction. All about yourself. Would you guest on a show where we already know that you have and that you're willing to? If so, and so, okay. So, what would you say makes a good podcast?
Oh, it's a bit of a tricky one because, like I say, I kind of dip in and out. I'm put off by length sometimes. Yep. So if I look at something and it says an hour and a half, like I say, I'll have to check the show notes and be like, right, am I going to invest an hour and a half in this? But then that said, sometimes I've looked at 8-minute podcasts and gone, I wish I'd not listened to that. So, yeah, I think it's just being about a subject that's engaging, I suppose, for me. And production value, I think, is still quite important to me. I've listened to stuff before and I've just had to switch off because the audio quality is just not there. I listened to quite a few Buddhist podcasts on Buddhist topics because I'm a practicing Buddhist, and some of the stuff that I listen to, some of the shows that I'm subscribed to, they use old recorded talks that were probably recorded on tape, at the back of a room or on a little microphone from Tandy or something. And just the audio quality is just not there, and even if the topic is something that is interesting to me, I'll just go, you know what, I'm just going to go and find a book about this or read about it elsewhere because the audio quality is absolutely grating. I've let that slide somewhat, like in a post-COVID era when things are recorded on Zoom and stuff like that. But by and large, like a Zoom recording is far better than a tape from like 1978 or whatever. So yeah, I like it. Audio quality is good. It is a good kind of marker for me. But yeah, I mean, I think it's more about content mostly. You know, if a podcast can sustain your interest for a full hour on an engaging subject, then yeah, you know, it's done its job. So yeah, I'd say that's probably like the three big things for me.
So, do you want to let people know if there's anything that you're up to that you want people to check out and where they can find you then, Dean?
Oh, well, I don't podcast, so you can't find me on Spotify or wherever on iTunes or anything. But you know, watch this space. You never know. So yeah, we've spoken about my photographic career. So yeah, at the moment, the Arts Council project that I'm working on is kind of the big thing. So yeah, if people want to read about that on my blog, they'll find that on my website, which is just deanleivers.co.uk. And yeah, the blog is on there with all the kind of details about the project at the moment. I would plug social media and stuff, but to be honest, I don't use it that much. So I'm pretty poor at keeping on top of Facebook and Twitter and whatnot, unless I'm blogging about the project, and then I'll just push a post out, you know, about work and things. But yeah, the website is probably the gateway to my mind and me. So yeah, there you go.
Okay, and if you go on most social media platforms, you're bound to find Pods Like Us. Just pop it in the search and you'll find us on Instagram, and there's a Facebook page, or you can find me, Martin Quibell, on Twitter. Just search for my name and you'll find me there. Anyway, thank you very much for talking with me today, Dean.
You're very welcome, mate. I apologise that it has been so long trying to pin me down for for an episode.
Not just for the episode, but it's been so long since we've chatted anyway.
Yeah. Well, you never know. Post the world going into meltdown/lockdown. I might go and I can hang out and have an outdoor pint or something.
Absolutely. I'll buy the first.
Lovely stuff.
Okay.
Nice one, mate.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.